safe zone inside Syrian territories. What are your plans to prevent that?
It is within the same framework. If there is an invasion, there will be popular resistance in the first instance. Of course, the Syrian army is not deployed in all the Syrian territory, but in the areas where it is deployed. And when conditions allow for direct military confrontation, we will not hesitate. This was the case 2.5 years ago when there was a clash between Syrian and Turkish armies, and the Syrian army destroyed some Turkish targets that had moved into Syrian territories. The same will happen again, in as much as the military capabilities will allow.
What about Idlib? What's your vision for the situation there?
Like any occupied territory, it is subject to the Syrian military and political plans for liberation. There is no doubt about this. Any land occupied by the Turks or by the terrorists will be liberated in time.
Despite this, and with the existence of all these problematic files, there are those who are talking about reconstruction. Are there any urgent plans in that regard? Are there states which have expressed a willingness to take part? There are also those, Mr. President, who have made the link between this file and your visit to United Arab Emirates capital, Abu Dhabi.
There are companies from various Arab states and not the states themselves which have expressed a desire to take part. If we take into account the extreme pressure applied by the West through sanctions on any company that might invest in Syria, we recognize that the process will be slow and risky for many of them. Nevertheless, there are those that are preparing to invest in Syria in ways which circumvent the sanctions. If we want to talk about reconstruction in its broad sense, I cannot say that the current political, economic or security situation allows for large-scale reconstruction. Nevertheless, a process of reconstruction has started, albeit a limited one. This is partly through investors, companies, or individuals who are rebuilding their facilities and infrastructure, and partly through the state's effort in rebuilding the arteries that constitute the core of economic life in some of the big cities.
I'd like to stop a little with your visit to Abu Dhabi and Syria's return through this large gate, as it was described. How do you yourself see it?
I don't know how a large gate is defined and what the word return means because we never left. Syria has remained in its place, with the same positions and the same conditions, dealing with them in its own way and according to its principles and perspectives. However, I would like to say that in their essence, Syrian-Arab relations have not changed much during the war. Most Arab states have maintained their relations with us and stood with us.
Even those that withdrew their diplomatic missions?
Yes, even those that withdrew their diplomatic missions maintained their relationship and kept positive feelings towards Syria despite not being able to do anything. Their position is the same, with some formal changes happening in this relationship as a result of the change in circumstances, whether regional, global, or any other. But I cannot speak on their behalf. However, I do not believe there is a great change in substance. The big change that is happening is in terms of form.
Let's ask honestly, does Damascus have any grudge against the countries which abandoned her during its crisis?
First of all, to grudge is proof of weakness. Secondly, begrudging doesn't lead anywhere and does not create any positive results, especially in relations with countries. Thirdly, we have to distinguish between policy errors made by states and the people in these states. We seek Arab-Arab relations, which means relations between people, and in this case, there are no grudges. Fourthly, we know that Arab countries have their own circumstances. We are able to say no on many issues. Perhaps many Arab countries are unable to do the same. This is not a justification, but it is fait accompli, and we have to deal with it. Blaming and complaining does not achieve results.
In the near future, the Arab Summit will be hosted by Algeria. Many people are talking about you attending the summit. Are there any steps in this regard?
Perhaps the only weight this summit has is the fact that it is held in Algeria. This is a fact. I am not being diplomatic here. Syria's relations with Algeria under all circumstances and since its independence from France in the early 1970s have been consistent. There is something solid between the two peoples, maybe because the history is similar despite the different periods. But if we address the Arab League, regardless of the Algeria summit, the question is not Syria's return or non-return, and the word return is wrong because Syria is still in the Arab League. Its membership was suspended. Syria did not leave. The issue is, what will the Arab League do in the future, regardless of whether Syria is in the League or not? Will it achieve any of its aspirations of the Arab citizens? I do not believe that it has achieved anything throughout the past 3 decades, and certainly during the last 10 years. It was a cover for the aggression against Libya, against Syria, and every other aggression. So the question is, will it be able to achieve this policy or not? If the Arab League continues with this approach, nothing will change. In the end, Arab states are subjected to external pressure on all areas. As long as this is the case, the results will be the same, and it is negative. Therefore, Syria's return or the termination of the suspension is something formal. It might have some benefits, but we don't count on them.
Through the steps taken recently, including your visit to Abu Dhabi, and the positive talk or the positive tone of the media discourse in many Arab capitals, is this going to add up in Algeria and afterwards through this entrance to terminate the suspension, as you said?
I will be happy to visit any Arab country. This is for sure, but it cannot happen without an invitation. It is normal and intuitive to think of visiting Arab countries because despite the utterly poor state of the Arab world, we have to limit the damage and avoid more decline. Dialogue with Arab countries and Arab officials is essential.
Here we might point out something very important. Many people say that any return to normal relations with the Arab states go through the relationship with Iran and will not be perfect as long as the close relations between Damascus and Tehran continue. How can Syria balance its relations with Iran on the one hand and, let me say, Saudi Arabia, if the relations returned on the other?
First, Syria's relations with any country are not subject to discussion with anyone. No one decides for Syria with whom it can and cannot have relations. No one decides for us, nor do we decide for anyone else. This issue is not subject for discussion and is not even on the table. Even if it was raised with us, we would reject it right away. This is first. Secondly, many countries that used to raise this issue in the past have not done so for years because they themselves are engaged with Iran, and this is a contradiction. Thirdly, Iran is an important country. If we want to talk about stability in the Middle East, we need relations with all these countries. But if we want to talk about balance between relations, the principle is wrong.
Particularly that Damascus has achieved it for many years.
Exactly, but not based on the idea of balance, because balance implies that there are contradictory parties that we need to balance between. We do not view things in this way. We believe that all these countries have common interests, and as such, the process does not need balance in relations, but rather openness and good relations. Currently, there is dialogue between the Gulf states and Iran, and we view this positively.
Might we see mediation after restoring normalcy to the relations between Riyadh and Tehran?
Of course, the basic logic implies that if there is a disagreement between parties that you have good relations with, it is only normal for you to play the role of mediator. This serves the individual and the collective interests of all countries in the region. Currently, we do not have these normal relations with all parties, and so we are unable to play this role.
There have been normal relations or normalization on the part of a number of Arab capitals with Israel. How do you follow the normalization in relations between these countries and Israel? And there have been rumors that haven't excluded Syria to the effect that Damascus will normalize on the condition of restoring the occupied Golan. Could this happen?
First, the term is wrong. In Syria, we have rejected the term of normalization since the beginning of the peace process in the 90s, because normalization as a linguistic term implies a normal relationship. And a normal relationship should move smoothly, like water, without obstacles. It cannot be coerced or artificial. The term normalization, however, is artificial in that it aims at pushing the Arabs towards making concessions to Israel in return for nothing. This is the objective. For us in Syria, the term is normal relations, and this is linked to a peace process, which is linked to the return of rights. This is definitive. On the other hand, we are against a relationship with Israel, regardless of whether we refer to it as normalization or anything else. This has been the case from the onset, since this process started with Egypt in the mid-1970s, and today our position remains the same. We do not agree with any such process, and we believe that all these processes have damaged our Syrian cause, let alone the Palestinian one. However, the biggest flaw in this topic is the Oslo Agreement, which granted all these benefits to Israel by the owner, Palestine, of this cause, and consequently providing a justification for any country in the world to normalize relations or make peace with Israel. Call it what you like, it doesn't matter, because the owner of the cause has abandoned it. So we are against normalization because it affects us. Syria will never change its position as long as there is occupied land, which is the Golan. When the Golan is restored, we can talk. And this does not come in the framework of normalization, but rather in terms of having normal relations between any two states.
Nevertheless, while we're talking, Israeli shelling continues on more targets, the last of which was in the surrounding of Damascus airport. We'd like to hear your comment on that.
This is a different issue, although it ultimately leads to the same subject, which is pushing Syria towards making concessions. The Israeli interference at the beginning was linked directly to when the terrorists collapsed in Syria, because the terrorist for us is the Israeli army, albeit with a Syrian or other identity. So when the terrorists began to retreat and their morale collapsed, the Israeli intervention was necessary to raise their morale and to remobilize them. What Israel is doing now comes within this framework and nothing else.
The last question with which I'd like to conclude with Your Excellency is the image that the West projects about President Bashar Al Assad. They said that the president stands against his people and against regional and international powers. Today, after about a year of your being elected by the Syrian people and the positive tone, as I said, of major Arab and Western capitals, or let me say international capitals, has the image changed?
In terms of the general public, yes, it has changed. Not because we've been able to address the West using a different language or because of different media capabilities, but rather because the big lie that Western officials used in the beginning and the unlimited exaggerations put them in a difficult position. They climbed too far up the tree and didn't know how to come back down. If we follow the official channels of major media outlets in the West that continue to spread these lies and that have close political affiliations, we notice that many of the comments written by their own citizens show that they no longer believe this narrative. If we want to address this supposed revolution, what is this revolution that has continued for 11 years with the support from the strongest and richest countries in the world? A revolution that supposedly represents the wish of the people against the state, yet the state has not fallen. Does this state consist of supermen? This lie is not convincing. No revolution continues for this length of time. There is, in addition to many other lies that their citizens have uncovered with the passing of time. So yes, I can say that the picture has changed, but no, this does not mean that people living in the West know what is going on. They know there is a big lie, but they do not necessarily know the big truth in our region.
Waiting to know the big truth.
No doubt about that.
We thank you very much, Your Excellency, President Bashar Al Assad of Syria, and thanks to our viewers. Goodbye.